Thank you so much for joining us today for our Secular Speaker Series. Please put your name in the chat and be sure to switch the blue button on the bottom from hosts and panelists to everyone so that we can all, well, we're not going to rage together today. First of all, it's not going to be ragey. I am guessing that some of you maybe made it to Tempe or Tucson to see Bernie and AOC yesterday. Oh, wait, I think Tucson is this weekend, actually. And I'm guessing that some of you all probably are taking part in some active resistance this weekend. So let us know about it in the chat if you've got an active resistance that you would like to promote. Last weekend, when I was in Tucson for the Festival of Books, over 1,700 people showed up to protest the local Tesla dealership down there. So if you've got the hookups for some good trouble, put it in the chat and make sure that everyone can see it. Next week, we're going to be speaking with Jacqueline Friedman. She is the founder and executive director of Educate Us, where she's building a movement for comprehensive sex education. But for today, we are pushing pause on the rage and pushing play on the science today. So unclench your fists and pull out your pocket protectors because we are going to get nerdy today with our guest. Bethany Brookshire is an award-winning freelance science journalist and author of the 2022 book Pests: How Humans Create Animal Villains. She has a Ph.D. in Physiology and Pharmacology. Oh, that means nobody at the Arizona legislature would ever listen to her if she were to speak in front of a committee. Brookshire writes on human-animal conflict, ecology, environmental science, and neuroscience. She is fascinated by the way humans perceive the environment and their place in it. Her work has appeared in Science News Explores, The Washington Post, The New York Times, Slate, The Guardian, The Atlantic, and other outlets, and she is based in Washington, D.C. Quite an impressive resume. Did I miss anything?
No. I'm glad to know that the rage is extending outside of Washington, D.C., because I can tell you living here, it feels sometimes like people outside are not as aware.
Well, I think in Arizona too, because, we've had the same party in leadership since about the mid 60s. And I would say over the last 10 years, things have gotten even worse as far as the polarization and the lack of decorum. So we've had to kind of stay plugged in here in Arizona at the local level for so long. It's not that much of a stretch to pay attention to what's happening at the national level. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's just sometimes I talk to people who don't live in DC and they're like, "Oh no, I'm a big fan of these people in government. They don't do jobs. Like they're just not doing anything." And of course, I live in Washington DC and many of those feds are my friends. Some of them are
Yeah,
my family members.
I can imagine.
And they
Yeah.
work very hard.
This weekend, we did have an event, and I spoke with many people who are, who have gotten some kind of notice saying that their job is going to be eliminated. The five, tell us the five things that you've done. A woman's husband was a postal worker, and he's been informed that he no longer has a job. Like, it is throwing people's lives into chaos. So I'd love to hear, I mean, I know we're here to talk about your book and the research that you do, but I think folks on this call might really enjoy hearing maybe some of the stories if you feel like sharing them.
Well, I can tell you my best friend was at USAID.
Wow.
So
Yikes.
there's that.
Yikes.
And I think what really broke them was when they went to shut down USAID. They one of the first things they did was they pulled down there is a memorial at the front of USAID because I think a lot of people don't realize that people who work in international development put their lives on the line for the sake of what they do. More than 200 of them have died in their postings. And there was a memorial at USAID with the names of those people. And that was one of the first things they tore down. And it was just very callous, and really painful to a lot of people. Don't get me wrong, like international development has its pros and cons, and everybody makes bad decisions, mistakes, things, nothing's perfect. But it definitely was really difficult. And of course, now I'm a science journalist, and so every scientist I talk to
Hmm.
is terrified for their funding. Biomedical, wildlife, many of the sources actually in my book, which I can go ahead and show you my book,
Mhm.
which is, I'm very excited. There's Blaze Orange on it. It makes me very happy. And many of the uh, people I've spoken to recently, they did much of their research with federal funding,
Mm.
with the help of federal funding. And now that is very much up in the air, and it's very stressful for a lot of people. And I think much of it comes from ignorance of what exactly the government does and what exactly the government funds and how much it reaches into so many aspects of our lives in positive ways, right? Many people do not think of the government except for when they pay their taxes. And like, don't get me wrong, taxes, like, it sucks for everybody. But we often don't think of the things that we receive as a result of that. Like, for example, really amazing um, studies on human wildlife interactions involving black bears in like the Midwest. You know, people often don't think about those things. So,
Yeah, it's mind-boggling. It's purposefully meant to overwhelm and confuse all of us, and it's hard to pull ourselves out of that, overwhelming and confusing state of being that we've kind of been in now for, well, I mean, not it's not just a few months either, right? Like this kind of uncertainty has been inherent in this timeline. Um, so yeah.
yeah.
Um, I'd love to know, you talked early about your interest in pests. So I'd love to hear a little bit. Well, I'm just going to let you go ahead and talk. And then again, if there are any questions that come up in the chat, I'll monitor that for you. But I'd love
Okay.
to hear how you got started on this work.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I have a degree in physiology and pharmacology. My research experience was actually in neuroscience. I studied drugs of abuse, with NIH funding, I should note, for my PhD and for my postdoc. And then I left academia. One could say that I flamed out in a truly spectacular fashion, and ended up switching to science journalism. And in part, I had been training for that for some time, but I switched to science journalism and I worked at Science News Magazine for about 8 years. It was wonderful, absolutely fantastic. If you do not read Science News Magazine, I highly recommend that you do. We are both very clear-eyed about science. We are very interesting and often extremely funny. So when the editors let us keep our puns, we can be extremely funny. And sometimes they do. So yes, I highly recommend. And while I was there, actually, I came up with kind of the inspiration for this book. And it was actually when I was covering a study that was published in 2016. It was published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, and it was a study on the origins of the house mouse. So basically, where did the house mouse come from? Because the house mouse is actually a separate subspecies of mouse. It is called Mus musculus domesticus. It's a separate species of mouse. And I was really fascinated because the study showed the scientist was Lior Weisbrod. He was a scientist at the University of Haifa. He is not anymore. He, like me, escaped and is now a writer, but we talked about it. And he did archaeological studies. And by the time he got to these archaeological sites as a graduate student, the only thing left to study was the really tiny things, the mouse teeth that were in these archaeological sites. He was studying archaeological sites from the very first human settlements. So we are talking 14,000 years ago. We are talking before agriculture. Okay. This was a period called the Natufian. This was a period in which people were talking about, we call it kind of intensive hunter-gathering, right? It wasn't straight up plant this field of wheat monoculture agriculture, but it was intensive hunter-gathering, right? They were going back to the same spots over and over again. They were accidentally or not accidentally cultivating specific species. And as a result, they were starting to settle down more. So they were starting to build huts, houses, to live in one place for about 6 months at a time. This was not fully sedentary, it was partially sedentary. And what was amazing was when they did, they acquired mice. And this was before gardening, this was before agriculture. We had mice before we had agriculture. We had house mice from the instant we had houses.
Hmm.
There was a species of mouse that went, that, that looks good. Right. And the that we're talking about is our food storage. It's our trash, right?
Mhm.
The mice started to be able to take advantage of that 14,000 years ago. And I just became fascinated by this relationship, by the idea that from the instant humans started permanently altering our environments, we had animals that walked into those alternate environments and went, oh.
Hmm.
And that just kind of stuck with me because the more I started learning about these animals and kind of studying them and reading about them, the more I was struck by how much we hate them. We don't look at the animals that live close to us and see them with joy most of the time. Most of the time, we either don't see them at all or we see them with irritation. And this is fascinating to me, right? We love the animals that we don't see. Right? We love pandas because they're rare. I say this because Washington, D.C. just got 2 new pandas. Hey. Anyway, um, and so big fan, new pandas, DC. We
Yeah.
love it. Anyway, that's what we have to offer the world. We have cherry trees and pandas. And we love pandas in part because they are so rare, right? We love lions, we love tigers, we love elephants. In part, we love these animals because we do not see them. And when we see animals too much, at first we kind of ignore them. And then we start to be bothered. We start to go, what are these animals doing in my space? Why are they here? I don't want them here. And then we start saying, get them out. And once we start doing that, it becomes a very short step to kill them all,
Mhm.
which is very often the response. And so I started to write this book based on why we hate some of these animals so very much and why some animals cause similar harms and we refuse to hate them. And what does that say about us and about what we want and what we desire about our environments?
I mean, full disclosure of all of the pests that, because we have, here in Arizona, we have scorpions that can,
Mm.
be quite deadly. I
Yeah.
actually had a nephew once who had to be air evac'd because of a scorpion sting.
Goodness.
Yeah, and we've got those giant cockroaches that come out of your drain in the summertime. Those don't really worry me. I mean, scorpions I know are dangerous, but like I don't go into a panic. I go into a panic when I see a mouse though. And somebody in the chat is asking and I know you don't know how the people in, 14,000 years ago felt about these pests in their home, right? But um, did it the Black Plague like exacerbate it, or has it just always existed where we have this immediate visceral reaction to like, you don't belong here?
So actually, that was a large part of the research that I did. And one of the things I found interesting is that we do have some ideas about how people felt about the earliest pests. We do. And one of the things that we have, for example, is we have some of the earliest mouse traps,
Hmm.
which are from the Indo-European early settlements. Mundagok is one of them. And there are preserved pottery sherds that when you put them together become a mousetrap. And the mousetrap is it's like a little mailbox, looks like this, has little holes in the side, and has a little sliding door. And the
Huh.
sliding door is connected to a string, which goes into a hole at the back. And the string is connected to cheese or a
Huh.
little piece of bread or something. And so the mouse goes in and eats it, and mousetrap. And
Huh.
interestingly, that type of mousetrap, with some alterations, still exists. It is still made. You can
Huh.
still
Well,
buy clay mousetraps. Um, and I should note that the air holes in the side are not for humane things. They are so to let the water in when you drown it. Um, so Yeah. So we know how people felt about the mice that were living in their grain stores, but I also know it's more complicated than that, right? We've always had complicated relationships with animals that live with us, and mice is a great example. Think of Mickey Mouse. Mickey Mouse is a mouse. He's not a very mouse-like mouse, but he is a mouse. And we see him as cute. And one of the things that was shown to me when I was doing research on this, one of the archaeologists showed me something he had found. It's about this long, it's this big. It is a piece of carved white stone, and it is carved in the shape of the head of a mouse. And it's got a little hole in the back that you can wear it as a necklace. And it's beautiful. It's really, really well carved. It looks like something you could buy on Etsy, honestly. It is 8,000 years old. So even 8,000 years ago, people might have been annoyed by mice, but they also saw something cute. They saw something interesting, right? They saw something that they made as a piece of art. And I think that's really important. And that kind of shows us ways in which we can hold complex ideas about animals together at the same time. But as to why people scream and go eek and the bubonic plague, I did do a set of research on that. Um, and there's some really fascinating research out there on plague. First of all, did you know that we are currently living in the third plague pandemic that is known to history? Oh, y'all should know that out in Arizona because that's important. That's important to where you are. Okay, so yeah, so the first plague that we think of is the plague of Justinian, which was the 5th century. The second one is the Black Death, which we think of as the 14th century, though it came in waves all the way through until like 16 something. And the third is now. It started actually at the beginning of the 20th century and has been run through to now. And every year there are cases of Black Plague around the world. Three countries in particular, Mongolia, which is in fact where we think the Black Plague is from, Madagascar, where it is endemic, and the United States, where Black Plague is actually specifically endemic at this point in prairie dogs. Do not snuggle a prairie dog. Don't do it. It's very dangerous.
And Lindsay's here saying that she was just at Yosemite last week and there were signs everywhere about plague squirrels.
Yep. Ground squirrels of all types can be infected with plague. Yeah, so plague is interesting to me because people think of plague as a disease of rats. It is not. It is not even a disease of humans. It is a disease of fleas that happens to spill over into rats and humans to deadly effect. And so what happens is a flea becomes infected with the Black Death, and the Black Death forms a biofilm on the inside of the flea's esophagus. Okay. So every time it tries to bite something, it can't. It can't get food, right? Every time it tries to bite something and get some blood, the blood just comes right back out because there's a biofilm there blocking the flea from eating. The flea starves to death, and you might think that's really sucky, and you might think really sucky flea. Anyway, you might think that, you might feel bad for the poor flea until you realize that every time the flea does this, it is vomiting blood back into the thing it's biting, and that blood is full of bacteria now from the Black Plague, and that's how you get plague. Um, and there is actually some debate, particularly with the second plague pandemic in the 14th century, as to whether or not rats were the prime mover in that disease. So for example, we know that there's several ways to get plague. There's many ways to die of the plague. You can get pneumonic plague, which is in the lungs, dead in less than 5 days. Nasty stuff. You can get bubonic plague, which is the one that has the lumps in the arm. It's the one with the pictures from the Middle Ages. That can take more like a week and a half. And all of these are curable with antibiotics, by the way. Thank you, medicine. And then there is also another one that is not associated, I believe, is skeletal plague. That's rarer. But there are different ways in which you can get this plague, and there are different ways in which it can be transmitted. And there are some who actually doubt that it was rat fleas that were responsible. There are scientists who say it might have been something else, like human body lice. Because the thing is, rat fleas carry plague really well. They carry plague really well. Did you know that every species has its own flea that is like specific to its, yeah. So every species has its own kind of like flea. We have human fleas. Congrats, we've got our own flea. Very special. Um, Human fleas, it turns out, are a really, really terrible transmitter of plague. Like they just don't do it well. You have to have a ton of human, like you would notice. Someone in the 14th century would notice this flea load that you would have to have. So either you'd have to have a major infestation of rat fleas trying to bite humans, or you would have to have some other carrier. And there is some evidence that human lice can carry plague, like head lice. Uh-huh. And body lice. We don't usually encounter body lice now, because we are taking showers on the regular, big fan, washing clothes, but lice are very small. They can hide in the seams of clothing. And it's possible they can transmit plague. This is all theoretical. It is all not proven. These are the sort of arguments that people can have when everybody who's directly concerned with it has been dead for like 600 years, which in my opinion are the best arguments. Um, the ones with no practical application whatsoever. But it is interesting. People only actually, and in the Middle Ages when this was happening in the 14th century, uh, people did not directly assume rats were responsible for plague. They did hypothesize that they were responsible for plague, but other things they hypothesized were responsible for plague include the moon, cats, dogs, the Jews.
Oh,
Like
wow.
many, yes. Look, you're secular Arizona. You know
Yeah.
the mind goes to conspiratorial places in times of stress.
Hmm.
And so people blamed a lot of things for the plague and they attacked a lot of things for the plague. Um, but rats were not actually specifically singled out. They were identified at the beginning of the third plague pandemic, which is now, at the beginning of the 20th century. That was when scientists first made the connection and went, wow, when rats start dying en masse of plague, humans start dying en masse of plague. And there's a famous experiment where a scientist from the early 20th century took a rat infected with plague and some fleas, and then he took another rat infected with plague, another rat not infected with plague, and the fleas went from one to the other, and the other rat got plague.
Yeah. Hmm.
And behold, science. And that was kind of the first real understanding that we had of that. But before that time period, people saw rats as problematic. They saw them as pests. They did not like them in the grain, for example. They got into your food, they ate your stuff. Nobody liked them. But people did not consider them disgusting. People didn't consider them broadly to be unclean. That is a 20th century invention, the idea of rats as being unclean. Because, and that also has to do with the development of the modern sewer. Because before you had modern sewers, you didn't have rats living in sewers, right? And people actually noted in the Middle Ages, rats, they're really annoying and they're in your grain all the time, but they tend to look pretty clean, rats. This is mentioned in historical sources. Rats are broadly very clean.
Hmm.
It was only with underground sewers. There is no power on earth gonna make you see a rat popping out of a sewer and think it's clean.
Right.
That. And that contributed to our growing disgust for the rat and the idea of the rat as being something that is fundamentally an aspect of disease.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm not a big fan of rats either. Here in
I
Arizona,
love rats.
my kids, when they were little, we decided to get them rats, and they were Aragon and Legolas because Lord of the Rings was big at the time, and both of them died. And then I read that a lot of them, first of all, they don't have a long lifespan,
Yeah.
and second of
Aging is
all, cancer, like they develop these giant tumors and died. So
That's in part because the
rat.
rats that we now use as pets are actually developed from laboratory strains of rats. And I can talk more about the development of the lab rat and lab mouse, because I did a lot of research on that too. Um, and the rats that are now bred as pets are derived from a strain called the Long Evans. And the Long Evans rat strain was developed specifically because it's prone to cancer. It gets
Huh.
tumors. That is literally why it was developed to study cancer.
Yikes, that's really messed up. There was a question here that I want to, first of all, our chat moves so quickly.
I noticed. I see it
And
popping up all over the
I
screen
mean,
here.
and you're in the right place as far as puns go. So
My people.
feel free to throw out as many puns as you would like.
Oh no. Oh no.
Um, because they're already doing it without you, so you might as well just go ahead.
I'm
And
so
there was
proud
a
of you all. I'm so proud of you all.
we're a bunch of nerds over here. So I want to tell all the nerds here, please feel free to put questions in the chat because this is a free form chat today and I'm excited. James wants to know, and I think that this question could be, for mice or rats. Are mice ever beneficial?
Beneficial to who? So we could talk about, there's a couple of angles into this. I'm a science writer, so when in doubt, my answer to almost everything is it depends.
Uh-huh.
It's all about context. Um, so for example, we can talk about the origins of the lab mouse, which I found really fascinating personally, partially because I was a scientist and the subject of my research was mice. I worked with mice and rats for about 10 years. And I have to say, if you're going to choose between working with a rat or a mouse, depending on what you want to do, if you're going to do a behavioral study, team rat all the way. And this is because rats actually like you and they're cuddly, like they'll
Mhm.
snuggle in your
Mhm.
elbow or around your neck, and they're sweet. They're sweet little guys. Mice just kind of hate you. And I appreciate that because they're honest. Like I appreciate their honesty. And on the other hand, when a mouse bites you, you mostly just go ow. When a rat bites you, you often need stitches. So trade-offs. Anyway, but I worked with mice and I became really fascinated with the origins of the lab mouse because scientists were not always um, researching in mice, right? For example, the 17th and 18th centuries, the big object of research, stray dogs. The
Mhm.
origins of the circulatory system and how we understand the circulatory system today, dogs, almost
Mhm.
entirely. Um, Insulin, dogs, because they were big enough to work on, and they were everywhere because there were a lot of stray dogs in those time periods. And stray things are things that people don't care about.
Mhm.
And so we ended up with a lot of that. And so as we got into the 20th century, C.C. Little, who is the founder of the Jackson Laboratory, which if you haven't heard of it, uh, I absolutely understand that because it's a very scientist thing. But the scientists, we call it the House of Mouse. Um, Forget Disney. Jackson is the House of Mouse. It produces a huge number of laboratory mouse strains every year. And C.C. Little founded it in Bar Harbor, Maine, in the early 20th century. And he was originally using mice from the mouse fancy, which, you know how they compete dogs in like American Kennel Club and stuff like that?
Mhm.
They compete cats also, and they compete mice. And there is a magazine called Mouse Fancy. Having studied this, I now have like a deep desire in my life someday to raise and compete fancy mice because people have been raising them as pets and competing them for like their coats and their colors. They come with curly fur, all these cool things. Um, and so Cece Little took some of these mice that were being bred for the mouse fancy, and he started breeding them to study cancer. And he started inbreeding them because mice are not picky about who they mate with, and so you can mate them brother to sister and brother to sister over and over and over again until they have all the same genetics. A lot of the mice we work with now are highly inbred mouse strains that are basically genetically the same to each other.
Mhm.
Um, and so he was breeding these, and after he was originally breeding them partially for cancer research and also partially for eugenics. He was he's a big fan of eugenics. Um, and then after World War II, he was like, wow, that was a bad idea.
Mhm. Wow.
Um, and was like, that's not great. And started thinking about using mice to study other diseases. and he needed to sell the mice. And so the first thing he did was he sold them to the scientific community. And he basically was like, look, these mice are all genetically the same, right? They are great models for studying cancer. They are small, they are cheap, they don't eat much, they breed themselves. Like, who doesn't love this? And the scientific community was like, yes, we're so in. But then he had to sell it to the American public. And he did in an article published in Scientific American, in which he opened with, do you like mice? Of course you don't. That was his opening line. And when I read it, I was like, oh, because he made the case that because we don't like mice and because eventually we don't like rats, it's okay to use them to solve our human diseases. We can do to them what we would never do to other species, in part because we hate them, because we consider them pests. And it worked. And now the vast majority of drugs developed to treat human diseases, the vast majority of procedures developed to treat human diseases, and not just human diseases, veterinary medicine, dogs,
Mhm.
cats, etc., all done in mice and rats.
Mm.
And in part that is because we hate them. On the one hand, we do things to them because we hate them, or we allow those things to be done. On the other hand, these mice have been hugely beneficial to human society. Like
Yeah.
they're incredibly important. A great example that came to light recently about this was during COVID, which, still ongoing. But there was a mouse called the K18H2, H-ACE2, which was a mouse that was developed during SARS that has a human ACE2 receptor, which is where COVID binds. That's where SARS-CoV-2 binds. That mouse was originally slated to be destroyed because no one was using it. Then COVID happened. They bred up massive amounts of these mice. They are part of the reason that we got an mRNA vaccine within a year, was
Wow.
because of mice. So mice are absolutely positive for many things.
So, the question was asked, are they beneficial at all? So, I mean, so they don't, if we have mice in our home though,
Mhm.
um, the droppings and whatnot, and like, I mean, it would cause, it's not a good thing, right? Like, I mean,
Um, so one of the things I got to do while I was reporting this book that I really appreciated was I got to learn from and form relationships with a bunch of indigenous groups. And one of those groups that I ended up speaking with some of their elders, and one of them, Harry Waters, who is also an anthropologist. So that was really awesome. He is an elder of the Diné, the Navajo.
Mhm.
And we actually talked about mice at length. And he said, look, the thing about mice, like they don't have a concept of pest in the Navajo language the way that English speakers do. And they say mice, every animal on this planet is here for its own reasons. We are here for
Mm.
our own reasons. They are here for their own reasons. There is no animal on this planet that is here for nothing. And their relationships with us and the way that they come into our lives tell us things that we can learn, right? And so he says, look, when a mouse is expected to not be in your house. That is its role. But your role is to keep a mouse out of your house. Okay. So when a mouse comes into your house, what that mouse is doing is telling you something. And in the very professional words of Harry Walters, that mouse is telling you to clean your damn house. So, I think it's worth thinking of these animals not as invaders necessarily, but as animals that are sending us a message through their behaviors.
Mm.
It's not an intentional message, right? I'm not anthropomorphizing these, they're not coming in and being like, I come bearing a message. Not a thing. Um, they are telling us something about the way that we live. And they are telling us something about what we need to do. And so the answer for mice, clean your house, seal up your holes, things like
Mhm.
that. Mice absolutely do carry diseases. They 100% do. Do not eat mouse droppings. That's bad. Um,
Mhm.
but other animals, so for example, I'm still doing research now on black bears. Um, and many people see black bears coming near human houses as being an invasion, right? The reality is black bears have always been there. They've always been in these environments. They've been throughout the United States. And when they come into our environments, they're telling us something. And in many cases, what they're telling us is food is scarce in the wildland for some reason. One of the main reasons for that is climate change. And the other thing they're telling us is maybe you should lock up your garbage. Maybe lock your garbage.
Mhm. Yeah, it's like we used to do an annual camping trip to Apache Lake, and there are, oh gosh, coatimundis there, right?
Mm,
And there may be bears, there's definitely raccoons, and good camper, you got to put your trash up because, and some people need to learn the hard way. And you get up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night and you see this coatimundi and it scares the heck out of you.
living
So,
daylights out of you. Yep.
yep, yeah. So there, okay, yeah. So somebody asked about hantavirus and that being carried around by mice.
I mean,
Again,
there's close and then there's too close, right? I think it's important. One of the things that I ended up taking away from the research for my book is that we draw a much harder line between us and the natural world than actually exists, right? We see ourselves as being separate from the natural world in our houses. We are not. We never were, and we cannot be. There's no way. It's not feasible. And there's a couple of ways that we can react to that, right? We can react to that in anger, which is how we currently react, or we can react to it in understanding, right? There is no question that there's such a thing as too close, right? Hantavirus is a great example of that. You do not want to live closely with mice,
mhm,
but that is not necessarily about poisoning the mice out of existence. It's more about changing the way that we live to not make our place welcoming for mice, right? It's a difference in perspective, not a difference in outcome.
mhm. What kind of, I think about, you know, other pests. It could be mice, it could be bugs, it could be, there was one time with a dog of mine had a tick infestation. That was a nightmare. I would like to
I have
know,
received, in reporting this book, I got so many ticks. I got so,
really. Yeah, it was disgusting and how they all gather at your box spring and I had no idea about that. So of course we, had to bring somebody out and get rid of it and all that kind of stuff. But what kind of impacts do we have in our quest to get rid of pests? Like I'd like to know, obviously these chemicals are not going to be great. So what are the impacts of our disdain for pests?
that's a great question, and there are so many. Um, so many impacts. One of my favorites um is Australia. And I say that as Australia, just as a concept. And I worry that after my reporting for this book, Australia is not going to let me in. But I also know people from Australia and they have like such chill, like views. Anyway, so Australia is fascinating because there are many, many species that have arrived in Australia because Australians like to leap before they look when it comes to getting rid of pests. And so one of the great examples of that was just mentioned in the chat. It's the cane toad. So basically, Australians, in the beginning of the 20th century, it's like 1930s, 20s, 30s, were attempting to grow sugarcane. Okay. Sugarcane came with a problem. The problem's name was the cane beetle. Okay. And they were trying everything to get rid of these cane beetles, and it was not working. And they really didn't want to use poisons because the poisons at the time were extremely toxic. I mean, still are. And so they came across this great idea for biocontrol. And biocontrol is just where you use one species to control another species. And there are many examples where this works really, really well, actually, really well. So one of the examples that Australia did very well was they introduced the cactus, the prickly pear cactus, to Australia,
Mhm.
in part because it hosts bugs that produce the red dye that you need to make British Army uniforms. It's a whole thing. Anyway, they ran into a problem with a predator of the cactus, and they ended up using another insect to kill it off. And it worked great because that it was a parasitic wasp, I believe. That parasitic wasp lives only on that particular cactus and only on that particular insect. It was a very perfect one-to-one pairing. So there are problems, however, when your pairing is not one-to-one. And one of those problems was cane toads. So they were researching ways to potentially get rid of these cane beetles. They came across research that showed that cane toads, when presented with cane beetles, would eat them. And they went, oh, cane toad, cane's in the name. Mm.
Mhm.
Cane beetle, cane toad. The cane toad eats the cane beetle. Yay, done. So a dude went off to Hawaii and he shipped back with toads. Like I think it was like
Mhm.
109 toads made it. Um, and they released the toads over the land. And they ran into a problem because the thing is, cane toads will eat cane beetles. They will also eat anything and everything else. The other problem with this, well, there's three problems. The second problem with this is that the cane toads will eat cane beetles if they can come across the cane beetle. But when a cane beetle is a larvae, it digs underground, and cane toads do not dig. And when a cane toad is an adult, it flies, and cane toads do not. So
Mm.
you can see the issue.
Yeah.
Um, Unfortunately, cane toads did really well eating everything else. And then you run into the third problem. Cane toads are poisonous. They have gigantic, timelessly fashionable 80s shoulder pads up here that are enlarged parotid glands, which have a very potent poison in them. And so the problem is not what the cane toads eat, the problem is what eats them.
Mm.
And predators across Australia looked at this toad and they went, oh, that looks nice. You eat one cane toad and you will never eat anything else. That's it. That's all for you. And cane toads started spreading across Australia. They are still spreading to this day across Australia. And predators just die en masse as these
Wow.
cane toads spread across Australia. And that is a consequence of us. That is because of
Yeah.
us. They are still trying ways to stop the cane toads. And there's some that I talk about in my book that are really, really fascinating and interesting.
I'm telling you, we got a smart group because somebody brought up, they brought that up. Corey, yeah, and dogs too. Um, so can you share that's an interesting story. I mean, I know that we do that kind of stuff all the time, thinking that we're, coming up with some great solution only to find out, years later, boy, that was a really terrible idea. What's your favorite one of those stories from the United States?
Ooh,
It's hard to pick, isn't it? I can tell.
that's tough. I do kudzu's good. Kudzu's good.
Let's
We
hear it.
Yeah, so kudzu, anybody here been to or from the Southeast and seen the fact that it's freaking coated in this big green vine called kudzu?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. I know what that is. Yeah, I've seen
Yeah,
that
kudzu.
before.
So kudzu was introduced on purpose. We brought it in as fodder for animals because cattle will eat kudzu, sheep eat kudzu, goats eat kudzu, etc. Um, Unfortunately, kudzu, actually humans can eat kudzu. Kudzu is fully edible by humans. Unfortunately, it's not everybody's favorite. And so if a sheep has another option, it won't eat the kudzu. And if a cow has another option, it won't eat the kudzu. And kudzu has spread all over the Southeast, and it's become a massive issue as an invasive plant. Um, and it was very much because we did not look before we leaped. And that's one of my favorite examples. There are plenty of other examples. I mean, one of my examples that I talk about in my book at length, cats, stray cats, like house cats. Yeah.
What about stray cats?
So we introduced the house cat to the United States. It is
Okay.
estimated that house cats are now around the world responsible for or contribute to the extinction of 63 species and counting.
Mm.
Um, and I say this as someone who loves cats. I have two cats, both of them former strays who wandered up onto my back porch to their potential regret. They live in my house now. Uh, they live a very pampered existence. Um, but we have often admired cats, and they're another example of biocontrol, right? We admired cats because they killed mice. They
Mhm.
don't kill rats very often. We can talk more about that later if you're curious, but they don't. But we liked them for their pest hunting skills. And so we brought them everywhere. There was actually a law on the books in England that every ship had to have a cat on it, ship's cat,
Mhm.
um, to help control the mice and rats on the boat. Um, and cats have now spread everywhere, not just in the US. They're a huge problem in Australia. It is actually legal in Australia when you see a cat in the wilderness, kill it. That is legal all the time.
Mm.
And of course they've caused major problems. They're causing huge problems now in Hawaii, killing
Mm.
seabirds.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it only takes a few because cats eat a lot, right? It only takes a few. And what's really fascinating to me about cats is that cats are one of those situations where the harm they do is the harm they do comes into conflict with what we believe about cats. And it's interesting and it's also really sad. So, for example, if there's a mouse or a rat on an island, right? And that mouse or rat is causing the death of hundreds of seabirds. Okay. We will drop millions of tons of poison on that island to get rid of those rats. We will do it. We have no problem. We will
Mhm.
put out traps. We will
Mhm.
do anything. We will kill them by the hundreds, whatever we
Mhm.
have to do. What if it's a cat? If it's a cat, we'll trap it, we'll neuter it, might try to get it adopted.
Mhm.
Never, like, I mean, and some of these cats can be adopted, but a lot of them really can't. We will do anything to not kill that cat because we believe that cats are not pests. We believe that they
Mhm.
are pets. A stray cat, a feral cat, is not an invasive pest. It is a homeless pet to
Mhm.
us. And that changes how we deal with it. And I find that really fascinating and sad, both for the species that the cats kill, but also for the mice and rats to whom we do not give that kind of consideration,
Mm.
right? Cats
Mhm.
hold a special place. And that's fascinating and also really sad to me. But I think it also helps inform, and cats are not the only species that I talk about with this. I also use the example of the African elephant as an animal that actually causes harm to humans and human stuff, and which we refuse to kill for very good reason. Um,
Mhm.
and how our feelings around those animals can actually drive better methods of control and better methods of coexistence because of our feelings for them, right? When it's just an invasive pest and we don't care about it, we get out our shotguns and we have no second thoughts.
Mhm.
But if it's an animal we care about, we will find other ways. And I think it's worth applying those other ways to the animals that we don't care about so much.
Mhm.
Not that we've been
And
effective with finding those other ways for cats because we really haven't. And cats, yeah, please keep your cats indoors. And if you don't, please make sure they have a bell that makes noise.
yeah. So, okay, because somebody asked, what would be the answer to manage the feral cat problem? I mean, aside, it kind of sounds like, you know, just putting them down, or another solution is simply having a bell, something that could act as a warning to the birds that because they really do only have murder in their hearts. I've had cats before, and where I take a walk down this alleyway, I call it, Murder Alley, because there's dead mice, there's dead birds, mostly pigeons, and just like these cats are murderous in this alleyway, and
Murder
it's kind
mitten.
of,
Murder
yeah,
mitten.
yeah.
I mean, so the answer to that is it's complicated. The thing is, some cats are absolute psychopaths, and some are not. I can safely say one of my cats has a hunting instinct, the envy of like wolves, the world. This cat, she has no teeth. She literally has no teeth, and this has never stopped her. She was indoors,
Mm.
but that's never stopped her. She is a murder mittens. The other one has all her teeth and all her claws, and her preferred prey are licorice jelly beans, which she never eats, but they roll nicely and they don't fight. Like she trying to imagine this cat killing something is so some of the scientists that I talk to that actually study the impacts of cats say, just talking about the number of species that cats or animals that cats kill is not really effective because
Mm.
it doesn't ask which cats are killing and which aren't. And it doesn't ask what behavioral interventions could stop those cats from doing that. So examples could be Belle the cat.
Mhm.
I do know cats who can, including one of mine, who can manage to silence their bells. So that, but another option, is they make these collars that are bright colors. They look like little clown collars,
Uh-huh.
and you can put that on your cat. That also makes a difference. Some behavioral changes, like keeping your cat in at night, can make a huge difference. And again, we get into cultural expectations around cats, right? There
Mhm.
are people who firmly believe, one of my favorite examples of this is actually New Zealand, Aotearoa, New Zealand. So you may be aware that New Zealand has a program called Predator Free 2050.
Mm.
And this is a problem that they have with mammalian predators. There were no mammalian predators in New Zealand until originally the Maori arrived with the Kiore, which is their specific Pacific rat. And then white people arrived and they brought cats and rats and possums and stoats and a bunch of other things. Anyway, Predator Free 2050 is the idea of getting every predatory mammal off of New Zealand by 2050. Interestingly, that does not include cats because I think it's like 2/3 of New Zealanders own cats. They love cats and they firmly believe that their cats have a right to roam. They believe it is unhealthy for the cat to be kept inside. So you're not just dealing with the impact of the cat, you're dealing with the cultural expectations that people have for the animals they live with, right? They have beliefs around how cats are healthy, how cats should behave, how cats should be allowed to live.
Mhm.
And so, how do you work with that? You tell people to just keep their cats indoors, they're not going to do it, right? One of my really good friends has two indoor outdoor cats. She knows about my book, she has read it. Her cats are not indoors.
Mhm. Yeah.
Like the cultural beliefs are extremely strong. And I think it's important to think about mitigation. Her cats are not indoors, but they got collars on.
Hmm. Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
that really matters. So sometimes you have to think about how to change things a little bit at a time. And sometimes that's a bell on your cat. Sometimes that's a funny collar on your cat. Sometimes it's just taking the cat in at night. Limited access. It can make a difference, but it's complicated. And it's complicated not just because of the animal in question, but because our beliefs around them are so varied and also so deep.
Right. So, speaking of strong and deep beliefs, I believe there is nothing beneficial to mosquitoes. Is there anything beneficial to mosquito? And you know what? I read so I have A negative blood type, and I remember reading somewhere sometime, I like people around me will be just slapping themselves with mosquito bites, and
But
I,
congratulations, you're extra delicious.
no, I don't like,
Oh
I
no,
don't.
maybe you're less delicious. There's a blood type that's more delicious. But there's also some people who exhale more carbon dioxide are also more delicious.
Hmm. Do they
So
serve any purpose though? Do mosquitoes serve any purpose?
the interesting thing, so first of all, I did not write about mosquitoes. I did not write about invertebrates in this book, for a couple of reasons. But there is a book called Mosquito that I highly recommend. There are efforts to potentially genetically alter mosquitoes such that you breed them out of existence for specific species of mosquito. And you have to keep in mind there are many species of mosquito, many. The mosquito that bites you in Arizona is not the same as the mosquito that bites me, and there are at least 2 or 3 species that bite me out here.
Mm.
So there's different species. Those different species carry different diseases. For example, malaria is carried only by Anopheles species. Zika is carried by a different species, uh, different things like that. I hesitate at the idea of breeding all mosquitoes out of existence. And I hesitate because when you ask what the benefits of a mosquito is, the answer is we don't know. And the problem is, in researching this book, one of the things I've learned is that often when we do something and we don't know what the impacts are going to be, the impacts turn out to be really bad. Cane
Mhm.
toads,
Yeah.
sparrows. They tried to kill off a bunch of sparrows in the during the Great Leap Forward in communist China. That did not go well. So that's the thing. We don't know.
Mhm.
And we do know that mosquitoes can be important food sources for specific species of bats, for example. Um, birds, right? So I hesitate to say there's never an upside to anything, right? One could argue, what's the upside of humans? Dang if I know, man.
100%. I mean, we are the peskiest of all the pests on the entire planet and have wreaked far more habit than, or wrought far more havoc than any other species, in my opinion. So that's a
And
very,
that's one of
very
the
good
things that
point.
like I also thought about because that is the answer, right? Like humans are the past. Like we're the ones going in here, like not looking before we leap and like all this kind of stuff. And we're like creating all these bad scenarios. And then I thought, I think that's too easy because it's too easy to just throw up our hands and go, what can we do? We're a scourge on the planet. Just screw it. And
Mhm.
I think the difference is we have a choice. We have a choice to learn. We have a choice to be different. We have a choice to change. And we have a choice to change not necessarily big things about the way we live, but little things. We have the choice to lock up our trash,
Mhm.
right? We have the choice to put a bell on our cat. Like these are not big things.
Yeah.
And so I think it's hopeful for us because we do have that choice. There are changes that we can make.
I always end because we're coming up, we got about 2 more minutes, and I always end on what gives you hope because normally it's Rage Friday, not like Nerd Science Friday. So, but you just kind of gave us the hope. We have the ability to change our behaviors to better, to live better alongside these different species. Um, can I ask just one more thing? Because of our conversation at the very beginning, and we are somewhat far removed from the things that happen in Washington, D.C. Do you have any advice, considering how many of your friends and colleagues have been affected now in the last couple of months? Is there something that we might be able to do to help as far as, I mean, I think a lot of us that are on this call are making phone calls to our Congress people, we've already been engaged here at the local level, but is there anything more that we can do as far as supporting? Because this really worries me with Christian nationalism on the rise. These folks don't believe in science, and they're showing it by the decisions that they're making. So what can somebody who's sitting in their home in Arizona do to try to support?
That's such a good question. And so like as a journalist, I cannot tell you what you should and should not do. That is not, that's not my
Mhm.
job. Um, I can tell you to do the things that bring you hope and to take action where you can. It's very easy to spend a lot of time online. Doom scrolling is the term. And it's very easy to feel hopeless and to just curl up in a ball and want to do nothing. And it can be really hard to take action. I see this a lot with people say, oh, I don't want to call my reps. I'm an introvert. I don't want to do it. And yeah, it's hard, but important things are hard. And even little things matter. And I think, local action can matter so much. Building that community, right? We talk about community. Everybody wants to be in a community and no one wants to build it, right? I think that matters a lot. I mean, it sounds like y'all are really in it to like take action and do the things that you need to do. And I think that's lovely.
Well, I appreciate today's conversation so much. We really needed this, and it's been just nothing but praise in the chat. People are very grateful that you're here. Somebody in the chat is halfway through your book and can't wait to finish it, so she's
Oh,
really happy that she was here
thank
today.
you. Yay. I would
So,
love it if everyone bought the book. They don't have to read it, but I do love it when you display it prominently in your home.
well, you heard it here, folks. Please buy books, and I'm going to encourage you to actually read it as well. But I know Lindsay put a
Or
link
get
in
it from
this,
your library. Support your library.
right? Because we don't know how long they're going to be around. So, thank you so much, Bethany Brookshire. I appreciate you so much, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend. And I hope everybody else does too.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. I really appreciate having this conversation. Have a good one.
Thanks, you too. Bye bye, folks.